Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In recognition of Banned Books Week, September 22nd through the 28th, we launched our first ILV book club with a series of short discussions of James LaRue's On Censorship, a public librarian examines cancel culture in the U.S. LaRue's book is a combination of personal reflection and a deep dive into the specifics of book banning. James LaRue will join us for a Q&A live stream on October 2nd. In the meantime, read On Censorship along with ILV fellows Elizabeth Spivak and Pamela Hayes Bohannon. This is the fourth episode, but you can find a link to our earlier conversations in the show notes. Or jump right in here and listen to our discussion of Part 3, entitled The Role of the Citizen, 7 Things You Can Do. Remember to join us for the live meeting with the author next week, Wednesday, October 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern. You will find a link to the show note in the show notes, and you can also find out more by going to ilvalues.org. Hi, we're back again discussing my life. On Censorship, a public librarian examines cancel culture. And we're now on section 3 of this book. So we have a little bit of a change of pace here. Now he's just sort of like, he's trying to offer us hope, right? It's like, yay, there's things you can do. So he says, he explicitly says, I'd like to end on a happier note. The role of the citizen, 7 things you can do to build a nation that you actually want to live in. So his first suggestion is laugh. And we could talk about, but we won't, research on, laughter and stuff. There's actually like laugh clinics and stuff. That was a big, rage for a while. But certainly the things that it does to your body and your brain are positive. Laughter, So sometimes it's hard to find things to laugh about, but it's good.
Well, I have this to say. So last week I went into Boston for a program on censorship that was it was a panel discussion, and the people on the panel were trans authors. There was three panelists and a moderator. They were all transgender individuals, and I was totally prepared for the usual gloom and doom that I get whenever I go to a censorship panel discussion.
Especially with trans authors, you expected right.
But this is the thing, is that usually I go to events with librarians. So all of these individuals were very upbeat. They were funny. They were prepared to laugh, and they said, they see this, this right-wing agenda as just ridiculous. They used the word clown for certain individuals who they didn't like. And they were, I was stunned. It was refreshing. It was refreshing to listen to them. And I was also stunned because I asked them, I said, are you not aware of what's going on in libraries, and that librarians have lost their jobs and libraries have been defunded? And they said, of course, we're aware of that, and we are absolutely concerned about it. They were also concerned, though, about pressure on them from the left, the invisible censorship we've talked about. They said that they felt a certain pressure to write in a certain way, to only write about certain kinds of people, and that sometimes they just didn't want to write about serious stuff. They just wanted to write something silly and frivolous.
They didn't want to write about being transgender. Right. Can we just, there's a lot of things going on in the world. Can we?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but they were laughing about all of this. And they were upbeat and hopeful, which it did give me hope. You just used the word hopeful, and they really gave me a minute to feel hopeful myself.
And there's certainly, I spend a fair amount of time in a public library, just, working right now, and I hear a lot of laughter. I hear the kids giggling and the adults, laughing, and I don't know. I do hear that in the library. I certainly hear complaints and fines, overdue fines or whatever. But I do hear, it's just sort of ambient. The ambient noise, I would say, is positive, is that people enjoying themselves. It's not like I'm listening in. I can't necessarily listen to what people are saying, but it's the tone, so,
Right.
so
Right.
yeah. The next one is talk to your children. I don't have any children, but I certainly have college students that are sort of my surrogate children. But you've talked about this,
Right.
several times. Just talk to
Right.
your kids. Yeah.
Talk to your kids. And yeah, we've talked about reading the same things. You can't read everything they read once they get to a certain point, but you can read some things. And, that's a simple thing you could do. Like, oh, what are you reading? How about I read it too? Let's talk about it. And there are some things that your kids are going to want to have private, and, you have to accept that too. But I remember when my child was, going to boarding school, and one of the parent orientations we had at the beginning, there was one parent who insisted that, she read everything that her child read, and she meant everything, every text, every, assignment, and I thought, no, you don't. You can't
Yeah.
possibly be. She's keeping something from you. She is absolutely keeping something from you.
Which is healthy.
It's healthy. You can keep, if that helps you to believe that you're reading everything she reads. But, I understood why she wanted to. I
Right.
understood why she wanted to, because she wanted to be able to talk to her child about what she was reading too, and what was, if they were reading difficult subject matter, that she wanted to be able to talk to her about it.
And, the research suggests that this is vital at young ages. So there's a difference between children's exposure to speech, so adult directed speech, like you and I are talking to each other, which a child might overhear, right? And child directed speech, where you are talking to or with the child. And there's vast differences in the number of words that children attain, which is then very predictive of all kinds of other metrics in development. The words that children over the course of their early lives, say up through elementary school, learn, and that it's reading with a child. So there's comparisons with television. It's television with a parent is better than television without a parent. And a book with a parent is better than a book alone in the early age. And there's even been studies about I just assigned this in one of my courses, where they put signs up in the supermarket to have that said things like, "Where does milk come from?" To try to stimulate, because parents are pushing their kids in the cart or whatever, and it's just like they're not talking to their kids. They're focused on the list. Maybe they're on their phones. Maybe, and even if they're not on their phones, maybe they're looking at a phone list. They're not even looking, so they're not paying attention to their kid. And these signs increased the amount of interaction between parents and children. And these little things, these little times, time in the car, time, when parents a lot are focused on their electronics, as are the kids, and we need to be, talking to developing a habit of talking with our, not just talking to, but talking with our kids, for lots of really good reasons. Read more books and talk about them.
Read more books and talk about them. I always say, whatever you're reading, there's more that you'll like. Read more books and read stuff that you don't think that you'll agree with. And then talk to your kids about it.
Yeah.
read more books and talk about them. Right. And he mentions like book clubs and stuff, which is great. Um, but, two people can be a book club. Um, I had a friend, we just decided to tell each other, what's your favorite book? And we each agreed to read the other one's favorite book.
Oh,
And then we had something to talk about the next time.
yeah. And, I think people do this with movies. Like, oh, have you seen this movie? Have you seen that movie? But I don't know that they do it as much with books anymore, trading around and stuff. Certainly in my family, we do. We trade around, we kind of know what each other reads, and we'll, read it and pass it on or whatever to make the expense of buying instead of going
Right.
to a library worth it. We trade it around. But he even says family book clubs, you and your husband often read things together, I know,
Right.
or,
Or,
yeah.
like a grandparent, like read Charlotte's Web. And then the next time you see your third grader grandchild, you'll have something to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Support the newspapers.
So much to say there. Because so many newspapers they're just gone. I was just realizing, when we first moved into Bridgewater, there was a little weekly newspaper called the Bridgewater Independent, and I'm not sure when it disappeared, but I remember that for years when I would walk my dog, when we got into the center of town, there'd always be a newspaper box, and on Thursdays or whatever it was, I'd open it up and grab a paper, and that's where I saw the police log and found out that my neighbors were arsonists and all kind of stuff like that. But like, how would I know now? How would I know that my neighbor's an arsonist now? And I mean, a lot of it was just, I call it like chicken pie stuff, and it might be silly, but it's a way to know your neighbors. And also it's the place where, he mentions, somebody used to be assigned to that beat to go to the school board meetings and the library board meetings. And then that person was able to bring it together for the rest of us. I mean, even if I wanted to go to some of these meetings, I can't go to all of them. And I can't, I don't want to.
Yeah. I really do want to read the summary. Thank you. Yes.
But nobody's doing it now. Nobody. And,
right.
And
we still have a little town. We have the Whole Times here in the town where I live, and I do subscribe to it in print because and online, so that I can do both. And I don't always read it in a timely fashion. I tend to let two or three of them stack up so you can follow the story, because there's always some drama, so I kind of like to follow the story. But development, like some parcel of land that's going to be developed. Where else are you going to learn about that? About who's going to, whether it's going to be a marijuana, production sales place, or whether it's going to be, a, grocery store, whether it's going to be a drugstore or another drugstore. In some communities, it's like, some are deserts,
another
right?
Drugstore,
and others. And others have a plethora, right? Too many drugstores. Those kinds of things, like where else, like you said, where else are you going to get it? You're just not. So yeah, these, they are shutting down. And if your community has one, it's very inexpensive to subscribe. And, you can help them out, keep your town council or whatever on their toes. Your library board, you'll know when the meetings are if you want to go, and that kind of stuff. So, volunteer, that's number 5. So he's suggesting volunteering.
And, that's actually a lot easier than I think a lot of people think. They say they don't have time. Some things, an hour a month might be all that's needed. Find out from, I imagine a lot of people are members of a church or a synagogue or another religious organization that do outreach to their communities. I know my church once a month packs lunches for the homeless shelter. And, if somebody wanted to help out, it's like 2 hours a month to go
Mhm.
help out. Somebody needs to do it, right? Um, if you have, if you feel like you might have a little more time, you might be able to volunteer for run for school board, um, or, I mean, here in New England, every little town has a jillion committees,
Yes.
and you could be on. You have to do is
And you
show interest, and somebody say, "Great, we want
Yeah. And you learn a lot. My sister in the Midwest was on the zoning committee for a long time. And man, she learned a lot. I mean, uh, she just learned a lot of good skills. These are skills you can put on a resume.
you." Right.
So,
And I mean, the other thing is that when I've gone to like uh town meetings where they were talking about things like, well, what are we going to put into this, the old academy building or whatever. Um, I would not only run into people I knew, but I would meet people who I was able to disagree with respectfully. Um,
because
and
that's what they were there for. They were there to hear
right,
the different sides. So it's actually an environment that where they expect people to disagree a little bit, right?
right. And, it's moderated. So, people I knew who I then just discovered didn't think exactly the same way I did about everything, you know? And we were able to say, oh, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea because, um, but without saying, what are you, an idiot? We can't do that.
Mm,
It's just,
right.
um,
Yeah, it really is a forum. Any kind of situation like that is really a forum for for airing disagreements in a more civil kind of way. And like you said, to your point, like you can volunteer. You don't have to. I mean, it turns out I'm volunteering for the Institute for Liberal Values, right?
right,
Where our dissonance,
right.
so sometimes you don't, it doesn't have to be something where you drive somewhere and spend hours and hours. You could do something. You have a bunch of craft supplies in your house, your kids outgrew or whatever. You can go to like, the local, um, you know, uh, council on aging or whatever, and do some kind of card making thing or something like that. Just it can be a one-time thing even,
Right, right.
and get rid of some things in your house that you're done with, so
Yep, I'm sure any local scout troop can
scout
use
troops,
your
yes,
stuff.
yeah,
Every church has a vacation Bible school in the
that's right. And
summer.
you
See
can
if they want
volunteer to
it.
run a little class, teach
Yeah,
somebody to knit with all that
right.
extra yarn, whatever. Yeah. um, Attend civic meetings. Well, we kind of overlapped with that
Right,
already. We kind of
right.
overlapped with that. Speak up.
Hard to do, but um, you know, I think this whole idea of attending civic meetings and volunteering, like I just said, they're places where you can sort of build that skill. Like, okay, so I volunteer to, you know, make lunches, right? And I may meet someone who, this is something that is of value to both of us, providing food for someone who doesn't have enough to eat. But it doesn't mean we share every single value. And finding those places where we do intersect allows us to understand, the humanity of everyone, be respectful, um, and I think about something I saw years ago. It was actually a Bridgewater State University alum who runs a place called the Paula Center, um, and he had one of the principles that his center ran on is people are more alike than different. And whenever I travel, whenever I meet someone I disagree with, I try to bring that to my mind. This person does have something in common with me. It's my job to find it. And this is where real conversation and real change will happen.
And he does talk about, another kind of speaking up is voting. And even that, it's like, if we are, everyone who's voting, again, has something in common, right? They care enough to vote. And I think you're right, like
Absolutely.
sort of just that reminding ourselves of what we have, if our neighbor has the opposing person's signs in their yard. Well, we do have something in common. We're living on the same street, which might need repair, right? And
Right.
so let's,
and we're both fed up with those potholes. We're both
right. Yeah. So he ends here. He's goes on a little bit of a he kind of circles back around, I guess, to a couple of his little rants, about heavy-handed application of laws, banning ideas, and he does pretty much, he blames, or he comes down a little bit harder on the right, although he's saying authoritarianism, which is certainly also shown on the left, and he mentions sort of self-censorship and censorship, and
right, and that was one of the things that the authors that I heard speak last week also that self-censorship was a thing, and that the publishers were also putting pressure on them because the publishers are just in it to make money.
right.
So there's certain things that they're like, no, this isn't worth it to us.
But that's a form of compelled speech, right? So, this author isn't talking about compelled speech, but certainly those authors, were suggesting, I mean, they weren't saying maybe not compelled, but, certainly pressure to say certain things, to write certain ways about certain topics. This idea like, well, this is, you're a trans author, so you need to keep making a point about trans authors, kind
right.
of thing.
And they also said, that, this idea that nobody else can write about trans people.
Right.
They were fed up with that. They said, we want to write about a whole range of characters too,
Right.
So we can't tell other people, oh, you can't tell somebody else's story.
Right. Because every character in your book has to be trans.
Right.
Like that wouldn't even be realistic, right? So yeah, I mean, he's kind of, and he's just reminding us, that things are still changing, like always still changing. But he goes a little bit, I mentioned to you before we started, like I see a little bit of a hypocrisy here where he's saying, the internet with all its anonymity and sort of extremism based on algorithms mostly, is I don't want to say he doesn't say it's harmful, but he says that the behavior that once would have been utterly unacceptable and acknowledged as false is now monetized and seen as entertaining and profitable. And then he gets to, like 2 paragraphs down, he says, but we can take comfort in the internet. It's really hard to censor anything because it will be available on the internet. So, and he does say we have to think critically about the internet, but I just think it's kind of funny. It's like, I mean, I don't blame him for doing that because I think we all feel that way, that there's, good and bad and everything. But I just think it's kind of, I think it's kind of funny that he doesn't acknowledge it. That,
the internet has its place, right?
Yes.
We need to find our place on it.
And I think he's mainly saying, to me, in this section, in section 3, that books are not, and words and stuff are not weapons of mass destruction. Speech is not a weapon of mass destruction. Now, certainly, I can think of, just offhand, sort of spontaneously think of, like the Bible or the Quran that has been, used as a weapon, right, to, or an excuse or a reason for brutalizing people. And, more recently, I mean, in university in our, little university bubbles, things like Ibram X. Kendi's book have been used, sort of as a club to beat people with, if you haven't read this book, if you aren't behaving as this book prescribes, as the Bible of anti-racism prescribes, then you are, also a bad person and, need to be reprogrammed or whatever. Certainly, I think there are cases where people or groups of people have used books, in sort of a weaponized fashion. But a book in a library is not going to turn the kid trans. Just sitting there on the shelf all by its lonesome.
Even if they read it.
Right. It's just like, I certainly read a lot of stuff that maybe my parents didn't like or didn't, I don't know, approve of, but I don't recall anything, even a book I really loved, even a book that I could tell you that meant something to me. Did any of those books fundamentally change who I am? No, they might have added nuance or, like you said, opened relationships, like in terms of talking to people, because I have a degree in English. So there was certainly all that kind of stuff. But do I remember like a book where it was like, oh, this made me who I am? I'm sure there are people that's happened to, but I sincerely doubt that, removing a book from the library is going to save massive numbers of people from, I don't know what.
I don't know what. And, I'm thinking about like, I must have been 15 or 16 when I read Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, which my parents had openly on the shelves at our house. I just picked it off. I still hid behind,
just in
my
case.
closed door, but obviously they intended for us to read the book. And I learned subsequently that, it was chock full of misinformation, or maybe stuff that was it was a first edition of the book, so like what it had to say about homosexuality was so out of step with what we know now. But again, it was, if we see it now, if I were to read that book now, I could certainly recognize, this is a mirror onto that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it would almost seem comical, some of the stuff that is just not even true, that I even at the time I knew, like, I can't be right.
Sound quite right. Yeah. And look, you were not permanently scarred by
I
this.
wasn't permanently scarred.
Even
by
false
it.
information did not permanently scar you. Yeah. So, and that's true of, like when you're a college professor, especially, but, at other levels too, when you talk about, historical information, historical knowledge building. This is, mythology or whatever. We're not scarring people by talking about prior belief systems. We're not permanently scarring. It's like, no, like we're celebrating the progression of science or knowledge or whatever. And so, yeah, that's my take on it is, because he ends with, if censorship is fear, then the opposite is courage. Let us face the world as it is and build a better one. And so, yeah, I think this was worth a read. And I think
I definitely am glad I read this, and I'm glad we talked about it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.